everyone, welcome to the Sports and Beyond podcast. Our guest today is Benn Achileas, founder and CEO of Sportbuff. Hey Ben, a platform targeting audience monetizations via fan engagement. Prior to founding Sportbuff in 2018, Ben founded four other ventures specializing in fan engagement via social networks and advertising. He is also actively advising and mentoring startups in sports, tech, and mobile industries. Monetization remains one of the big pain points of the sports sector, and we would love to learn more about how Ben and Sportbuff are addressing this problem. Welcome, Ben. Thank you very much for being with us.
Hi, thanks a lot for having me.
Thanks. To start off with, that was your personal story and also the story of Sportbuff. How did you come up with the idea of creating the company?
Sportbuff is really about my background in working extensively with sports fans and engagement, both locally and globally. But Sportbuff itself has really come from my inherent need of wanting to connect more with my kids, with family members, and with friends abroad. And it's something which I find myself whenever I'm watching a game, within 5 minutes, I'm not focused on that game. I'm on WhatsApp to my friends. We're talking about what's going to happen, what we think is going to happen. I'm placing sports bets, and even with my three young sons, within a couple of minutes, they're on, or even before the game starts, they're on Twitch, they're on TikTok, they're on Twitter, and they're absorbing as much content as they can around that. And it was just something where there's always this part, especially with sports fans, they always think they know what's going to happen next, and they want to prove that they know more and than the person sitting next to them on the couch, or at the other end of a WhatsApp or a Facebook message. And so this is then something which we really wanted to tap into. And in my own personal experience as well, it's something which I've got a lot of friends and family which are distributed around the world would be watching the same games, whether they're Premier League or NBA. And it was always this sort of frustration of like, well, hang on, why can't we just watch the same game together, in different physical places and interact with each other, directly without needing to go to all of these different products. And that's what ultimately led to the birth of Sportbuff. And it's a way to remain connected with your network, be able to prove yourself, that you know more about that game or the sports than anyone else, and be able to do that without missing any of the action. Because then when I'm interacting with those friends, my eyes are away from the screen. And so we've made Sportbuff as this like first screen operation. And so it means that you're watching the game, and over the top of that is where you receive these different engagements and interactions, from my friends, family, other fans. I'm competing against them with live predictions, with bets, with quiz challenges and trivia and more.
Yeah, I think you're addressing a very serious problem I can totally relate to. Nowadays, we're exposed to so much content and information. We're constantly being distracted, and it's becoming more and more difficult to really enjoy the moment and like be in the moment. So maybe to go a bit more in details on what exactly Sportbuff does, or how exactly do you help people communicate and interact with each other while watching something and being a little bit more engaged during the game?
Yeah, sure. So Sportbuff at its core is just this tech framework where we are able to allow our partners and our audience to be able to engage with that sport in an entirely new way and in a new layer. And so the way we do that is effectively just providing these tools, and that allows our partners to then be able to look at ways to engage their audience. Obviously with sports, like since the first ball was kicked, someone probably put a bet on it as to who was going to score and who was going to win. And so predicting on sports is as old as sports themselves. And so we constantly see that is the the number one driver for any kind of fans whenever they're watching anything, to be able to predict the outcomes and be able to prove that then they know better. And that then cascades into like quiz and trivia, because again, sports fans are, very much about wanting to prove that they remember those player stats, or the athlete's performance, or the game results from way back when. But what we're now finding is there's kind of like this new kid in town, and this is a really exciting part about Sportbuff. When we're working with partners, I'm talking to them about how cool it is and all of these different things you can do, and they get it, but they don't really get it. and then they'll run these different events, and then it's really similar, and you start seeing like them starting to understand this, and then they'll start increasing the frequency of the buffs, which is what we call the real-time engagements. They'll start increasing the frequency. They'll start trying some different ones. But we've had this really interesting part came about recently with FIBA. We're running over the Basketball Champions League, and it was one of those things where then they had people voting on different parts, and then they actually brought in a courtside reporter, and she was there halftime and full time, and they would push this buff out to the audience and say, which player do you want us to interview at halftime and full time? And the engagement rates on that were phenomenal, for anything outside of a prediction or a quiz. And then suddenly it becomes this really interesting like concept where, as a fan or a viewer, I'm then able to almost pick what I want to happen next. And I've got a chance to then like start steering the production. And from the partner side, I mean, there's no disruption to that flow, but now they're offering something which is much more personalized. It's original, and that's where it really resonates with the audience. And I think that's one of the real big, takeaways that I have through it, is really about, keeping the fan at the center of everything that you're doing, and really looking at how you can personalize that experience and do it in a way where they're aware of it and they're part of it, not kind of like cookies behind the scene and tracking, because we've all seen those cookie alerts, and you just turn them off as quick as you can. But actually having it where I as a fan feel like I'm engaging with this, and you're listening to me, and that's where it becomes really interesting, where we start breaking the fourth wall, as it were.
Yeah. This reminds me, it sounds a lot like the Netflix Bandersnatch movie. I don't know if you have seen it, but it's basically throughout the movie, the audience or the viewer can actually answer some questions, and then the course of the movie changes. But of course, this is much more, I would say, realistic in terms of like you're actually being on the spot of something like a real game and real kind of event, which is very exciting. You mentioned
Definitely.
that you are increasing the fan engagement, and you gave some very good examples with interviewer, halftime, full time, which player you want to interview. How do you measure the fan engagement? Are there certain metrics in the industry which are standard? And for example, from your interaction with your clients, what are the metrics that they're looking for, and what kind of engagement level are we talking about?
Yes, I think it's the first thing that you have to do with any partner is make sure that you're all starting from the same place, because especially when you're in a new or an emerging media scene like what we're delivering with Sportbuff, is you can end up getting a bit carried away and coming up with your own language, and defining these kind of metric points, which is relevant, and it's really good. But the problem there is the failure to kind of communicate that to, or equate that to value outside of your own space. And so a good starting point is always then looking at what already exists as an industry standard. And obviously, as we've seen the kind of like rise of social media platforms over the last 15, 20 years. And so there's criteria in there which it doesn't map like for like, but actually it sets a really solid benchmark for what a partner, or what the industry at large deems as an engagement, and what is a good value for that. And so being able to take that and map that against our own buff metrics and data, we can then present back to our partners and give them access to the dashboard, so then they can actually see, okay, cool, this is how my audience are engaging. This is how it's comparable to kind of these other metrics. And so it's arming them with the tools that they're able to take internally into their organization and externally, and show what a fantastic job they're doing. And it also allows them to, to really understand it on a kind of like for like basis on there. So we're then using that as the benchmark, and then we start adding on our extra layers, our secret sauce, where we're then able to show, okay, so here's where you map against everyone else in this kind of more traditional criteria, and here using the buff metrics, here's how you map there, and where you compare against other partners in the space and what they're doing. And so it's done in a very collaborative way. We're very open with with our partners, and we're able to take those insights and learnings, feed them into the platform itself, and even pass them on to other partners to show what some people are doing that works really well. And the really compelling metric that we're seeing is that where we can see audience are engaging or they're retained kind of 2 to even 10 times longer than when buff isn't enabled on a platform. And that's like insanely powerful as a metric, and for our partners, whether then that means there's more time to to be able to serve additional content to that audience, to monetize them more, to build a relationship with them. And so it all then feeds back into their goals. But for us, it's really just about data, and as much as we enjoy constantly building up the product, you need to remember why you're doing it, and you need to justify it. And it really is then coming back to what are the industry standard metrics? How can we measure up to that? How can we create our own on top of there? And then how do we show the value for clients succeeding in that way?
Maybe a quick question related to that. Do you also see any difference between the metrics of fan engagement for traditional sports versus esports? And obviously the traditional sports industry has been very well monetized compared to esports, which is all digital and it's a little bit more complicated. So in that sense, is fan engagement in a way helping the monetization of esports approaching the level of traditional sports?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always an interesting discussion, and it's kind of like when parents might compare one child to another, and and that some ways to monetize and new ways to engage audiences. And I think that traditional sports is always then used as that guide, initially because it had to be, and so it was a way to then be able to show relevancy, and like I said a minute ago, kind of finding the old metrics and being able to show how you equate to value in that. But I think that the issue with that sometimes is, it like esports as a category might then get compared to, say, NFL, NBA, Premier League levels of monetization, and you're not really comparing these things, equally at that point. We are going to be looking at a place and a time where the kind of NFLs or the Premier Leagues of esports, really emerge and take their place, and that's something really exciting to look forward to. But the audience engagement on esports, typically you are able to look at slightly different metrics or expect slightly different returns than you would with traditional sports, because your esports audience have by and large kind of grown up behind that screen, and are used to interacting with content around their actual show, whether that's on Twitch or YouTube or Facebook or others. Whereas, from a traditional sports side of things, typically it's much more event driven. And then when you have got those global audiences, for example, like with the Premier League, that's been driven by traditional linear TV contracts. And TV obviously is a very passive media at this point, and how it stands for most of the world. And so then you've got very different audience behaviors from the start. And I think that with esports right now, it is still while it's maturing all the time, it's still in a massive state of immaturity, which is really exciting because it means there's so much, so many great things to come from this. There's so much that we've still yet to unlock around that audience behavior, around that audience engagement, and how far we can take that. And that's where, you're seeing it now more. Traditional sports are looking towards esports and seeing how they can learn from it, how they can take some of that audience engagement into that traditional sports side. And so it is going to be very symbiotic.
We had a similar discussion with at another episode of the podcast, where we definitely see more interaction between traditional and esports going forward, and esports learning a little bit from traditional sports on monetization, but at the same time traditional sports moving more towards becoming digital and learning on how to interact with like digital audiences going forward. That's a very interesting dynamic. Maybe to go a little bit deeper into the monetization aspect of fan engagement in general. So I know Sportbuff is monetizing audiences on different levels. So it could be through merchandise and e-commerce, could be through betting, could be through rewards and everything. So in that sense, who are the main kind of beneficiaries from the monetization in terms of the whole esports ecosystem?
I think it's always, in terms of the beneficiary, ultimately it has to be the fan. The fan has to be at the heart of any monetization strategy you're doing. Otherwise, it's almost destined to fail, because at that point, you're almost doing it for the wrong reasons. And it really needs to be around, the audience, because without them, there aren't any sports. There isn't a buyer of the rights. There aren't people to attend the events or to buy the merchandise and do all of this. And so it has to be, around the fans. And I think that, of course, there are many different ways to look at that, but for me, it's their motivations. And when I'm saying about the fans, it's not then just about which team they support, for example, and how do we sell more of that product to them. But it's about understanding, what are their drivers. And after many years in sports tech and working with fans, across the world and in all regions locally and across so many different sports and esports, I think that the two key driving factors for fans are really around personalization and how that relates to their identity. For example, me as a Chelsea fan, and then also convenience, and any kind of monetization strategy is, by and large, you really want to try and tap into, to one of those two strands. And if you can get both, fantastic. And that's going to be the key to, to a successful monetization of that audience. And so it's not just about trying to get more money out of the fan to exploit them being a fan. It's about understanding how you can improve their experience, how you can make their life better. And attach a small transaction fee to that. A relevant example of where we've done that, with Buffs, is the ability for me as a fan to be able to then pay a small transaction, and then to be able to adapt that kind of buff stream to my interests. So again, just referencing as an easy point of reference for me as a Chelsea fan, if I'm watching a game and I'm receiving, different content coming through about all of the action that's going on, the different teams playing, for me, I'm just focused on my team. I'm happy to be monetized in a way where then it means that I'm only answering questions and challenges and predictions on my team. I'm competing in a mini league or a VIP league against other fans from my team for a prize about my team or my my allegiance there. And so all of this relates to personalization and my identity as as a Chelsea fan in that case, and the ability for me to personalize my experience. And in some cases, it's also about convenience, because rather than me having to go to this place, that place, and another place to be able to get all of my content. We're serving it in one place. And so that to me is, is a relevant monetization strategy, and one that, you're not going to have a short-term burnout on there, because you're actually fulfilling a need for the end user, which is the fan.
Do you see a lot of fans opting in for that option to have buffs which are specifically targeted to their personal needs and their interests, or are more fans kind of open to being, interact with different kind of buffs and engage on different levels?
So this is a really good question, and there isn't a straightforward answer to that. And this is where we're using the data to be able to create cohorts and to segment the audience. And so the same way how we understand more about the fans based on their interactions, and so it could be that Viktoria is much more of a predictor because you engage with prediction-based content, whereas I might be more of a kind of quiz master because I'm more on the trivia side of things. It's also a way for us to understand about, their motivations when they're on a partner's product and across Sportbuff ecosystem overall. Are they just there for their team, for their game, and that's that? Or are they actually, quite open-minded about or broad in their interest about other sports? And this again is something which, there's no right or wrong for any fans. It's the same way how some people might go down the pub and watch, multiple sports games, whereas some other people will only go to the sports bar just to watch their team, and that's all they're interested in. And so, the way how we reflect that in Buff is, by the different content that we push through, and we can then start seeing what they're interested in and being able to serve them more of that content and personalize it around them. And we're able to offer them different incentives as well. So for example, they could be watching the football game in the day, and there could be a pay-per-view boxing or UFC event that evening, and we're able to ask them, if they've got the tickets for it, if they want to take out a subscription, for that event. And so again, as people interact with it, we're able to track that permission-based, and then use that to then be able to create, a better experience for them ongoing as we iterate that based on knowledge of how they want their sports served.
I think this goes back to pretty much the fan being at the center and kind of catering to the needs of the fan in order to retain them. This actually
Absolutely.
The next question I had. So fan engagement, of course, is one way to increase audience monetization, but what are some other ways to do that? And you already mentioned that. I think one of these would be really personalizing the experience. You already mentioned that you're collecting a lot of data which could be useful on the fans, on their personal interests, and how you can cater to their needs. So are there any other ways you see sports monetization developing going forward?
Yeah, there's so many new ways. I mean, along with technology and emerging interests in there, and like right now as we're speaking, there's obviously a lot of excitement around NFTs and the ability to kind of create these collectible moments or sort of transfer the concept of what would have been traditional, trading cards or sports memorabilia, and being able to recreate that in the digital space. And obviously, that presents something which, from a fan side of things, again, comes back to their sense of identity, of personalization, of me then being able to collect the cards or the moments or the plays of, the athletes that I care about or the sports team. And so we're in this really exciting place right now where actually, we're still discovering, new ways to be able to monetize and engage that fan base, and doing it in a way which, brings something to, to the whole experience there. So I think that, from the kind of like creation of assets is a really exciting new area as that's opening up, and that's something that people wouldn't have even been able to, think about several years ago. But now suddenly we see it as a I don't know if it's a billion-dollar industry yet, but it seems to be based on all of the the PR that goes around it. But and then you start thinking, well, how far can that scale? And even from our side of things, is it something that that buffs themselves can then actually be have some level of value for those fans and for the audience, similar to the way how different tweets have been kind of like auctioned off in that way. But this is where, again, you always need to sort of like bring it back and understand, well, what is the motivator here? What is the driving faction? And again, it has to be in the fans' interest. It has to be, it has to be valuable to the fan and for their experience. And then you can build up from there. It's not a case of then just kind of thinking of monetization ideas and then trying to make them fit, because whilst you might get some level of return back from that, it's not long term and it's not going to stick. And that's really key. And that's that's what you're going to be able to build successful businesses and strategies on.
So I guess it's fair to conclude that going forward, many monetization kind of strategies would actually tailor according to the needs of the fans and what they really need, pretty much.
Yeah, definitely.
In terms of maybe taking a step back and looking at the macro kind of picture and the development, the esports industry has been growing a lot. And obviously, it's hard to ignore the pandemic impact that we have seen on the industry. I think it's kind of mixed. So for traditional sports, we've seen a lot of events being put on hold and postponed. For esports, we've seen shift towards mobile, but then there's been, again, like some of the international league tournaments being kind of postponed. So in that sense, do you see the past couple of years, was there a positive impact on fan engagement? Kind of, did the pandemic accelerate a little bit more the shift towards trying to monetize the industry and looking at the fan at the center of that industry and trying to really cater to the needs of the fan? Or has there been any kind of positive or negative impact from that?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely kind of caused like a seismic shift in the in the whole world of sports and obviously beyond. And I mean, it was a great tragedy for humankind that happened there, and there's many lessons to come from it. But with regards to the sports side and the fan engagement, what it did on one turn, where, as you say, suddenly there were no live sports and it sort of turned off the tap, and you had just massive organizations where they needed to find something, and sports broadcasters who had 5, 10, 17 different sports channels with no sports actually being on there. And there was this huge need, combined with the fact that you already then had an audience that was mostly being told to stay at home and was looking to consume content. And naturally then what you saw was a real spike in the visibility of esports, a massive spike in streaming consumption and those those behaviors. And these are things which they're not anomalies. The industry was kind of heading that way already. Streaming trends, you've seen them quarter after quarter, going higher and higher. But obviously at this point, you now then suddenly, forced everyone into this at-home state. And it really accelerated many of the market conditions that were happening. Some of them were, very positive, especially for us at Sportbuff. And, and some of them were not so positive, because you had some business models and stuff around sports that, maybe it was on its way out already, but then suddenly, that was compounded. Environmental conditions around that were compounded. And so, it really changed things up. But I think that's where, it's really led to a change in behavior, across the board. And as people then try to normalize where we're at now, you start to find this kind of tide mark. And it's happened, across the board. And it's anywhere where there's technology. I mean, we're doing this on a Zoom call. Just even probably, just over a year ago, it would be any kind of podcast that you're doing. By and large, it was trying to get those people into a more high-end studio to get some good recordings out of it. But there's just the tolerance and acceptance, and again the normalizing of video calls. Now the amount of times when you're watching a news story and people are just dialing in from their home with their study background, and I remember when everyone first started doing Zoom and they're all doing virtual backgrounds, and then we all just kind of found that as too much effort. And I'm glad it ended, or has come to a sort of a close where it is, because I think another year and people will just be doing calls in their pajamas and vests or something. But it's even now as well, when you look at other kind of technology plays, things like Cameo and those the ability to get a celebrity to record a message with you. I mean, they already existed. They were already seeing good growth a couple of years ago. But suddenly you've got all of these celebrities and pro athletes which are just stuck at home, not doing much anyway. You've got people which are then maybe have slightly more disposable income in some levels, because they're not going out and spending it. They're looking to engage with those people. And so then you see an absolute surge on there. And I think that what we've been doing as well, for us at Sportbuff, it's been, hugely, it's really accelerated things. Because a lot of our partners are broadcasters, sports broadcasters and sports rights holders, and now they've very much been in a position where they can't have fans in stadiums, and they've got a lot of those fans which are sitting at home. And how do we engage them more, and how do we help keep them focused on a game when actually the propensity for them to be distracted by other media is kind of tenfold, because there's so much other stuff going on. And just lastly, for me as a sports fan, it's been really fantastic, because you again had these kind of older models that were in place because of the broadcast structure. So here in the UK, games wouldn't be shown at 3 p.m. They would maybe only show like one or two. They'd only televise one or two games, like in a day, because they didn't want to cannibalize that stadium attendance. Well, suddenly, like every single Premier League game is available to me. Every NBA game is available to me. Every NFL, and it's just like, as a sports fan, it's fantastic, because I've just got games coming through. But then equally that creates an issue, and this is where we come into it with Buff, is them providing an extra level of engagement and excitement, around the games that you're watching, because now it's like a kid in a candy shop where I've got so much choice, and that can lead to that kind of choice paralysis, or someone switching off from it. So we need to make sure that you're constantly being stimulated as that fan, whilst you've got all of this content going on.
Yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic. Sounds like our content consumption has increased, but at the same time, our engagement level and being able to really concentrate on like one specific thing has really gone down. So it's kind of like, I would say it's a problem that we will be facing even more going forward if kind of persists.
Yeah.
You mentioned a few times that you have really Sportbuff's kind of operations have really accelerated during the pandemic, and that's great to hear. Can you maybe go a little bit into more details? What's kind of next for you as a venture? What are some of the projects that you're working on, and some of the going forward kind of themes and exciting endeavors that you're having?
Yeah. So well, for what's next for us, and big picture for me is seeing that is seeing this through. I'm not going to stop until we have global dominance as the best in class first screen fan experience over all sport, and we've actually just concluded two massive partnerships that are really going to help accelerate us along that path. But it's something that sport is it is a great driver and a great passion of mine and where we're going. But we also have multiple partnerships coming through, which are in entertainment, in news, and other like show formats. And so this is where it's really about understanding, what we have here doesn't just make that sports fan experience, awesome. It's something where it's able to deliver that beyond sports. And it feeds into a bigger picture around the vision of what we're actually doing, with Buff and where we're going, which is very exciting. But reeling that back a little bit from a product perspective, we're constantly iterating the product. We're constantly in an R&D phase. We've just completed trials on this new feature, which is going to massively disrupt the space, especially in esports, because it's a really cool way to introduce monetization in a very relevant way based on what I've just been speaking about as well. And so, it's going to be huge, and we've developed this. We're bringing it to market, and it's the big play in the monetization space, and we expect that to really reap rewards for for our partners, for the business, and obviously, of course, for the fans. So, for us, the next steps right now are it's really about being in a quite aggressive growth mode, because the market conditions are really, really favorable for where we are. The results that we've seen from the platform, directly from end users, from our partners, the metrics that we're pulling back are phenomenal, and this is something which really taps into the needs that we've got of our partners to engage that audience, to keep them watching longer, to be able to find more ways to understand them, to collect more data, and to really provide a better fan experience, a better engagement overall.
Sounds great. And for you personally, we like to ask this question to entrepreneurs on the podcast, because I think you have some amazing experience that you can share. You've worked on a few ventures already. So what is kind of like a main lesson or like learning that you would like to share to maybe aspiring founders and entrepreneurs who are just about to start their entrepreneurial journey?
Look after your hair. It's, honestly, I don't blame. I do blame it for my hair loss. I think that is something which when you're doing what you do, it's like there's obviously you're doing it because you believe in it, and you have a dream and a vision, and it's about making that a reality, and sort of like forcing that into existence, and the successes are really cool because of that. But then when there are the failures or the downtime, it sucks, and it's something which it hits you harder because it is personal, and then also for me, I'm like constantly thinking about Buff, and I'm working on it, and you can also fall into this sort of like habit where sometimes you feel guilty when you're not working on it and you're doing downtime, whether that's with friends, family, or even just some personal time, and so I think that you need to make sure that you understand that this isn't a quick race, that it is there's a marathon for you to that you need to win, and so you need to keep yourself in the best condition that you can. So I think the way how I've done that is, and I'm not saying I'm a beacon of health, but the way how I've been able to keep that going is by having a routine, because I work pretty insane hours, but having almost like a little checklist of some of the key things that I need to do every day, which aren't necessarily work focused, and this is making sure that I'm going for a run and that I'm having the right kind of intakes and stuff like that, of just making sure that you've got that there, and the flow of how it's going. The more routine that you're able to put in place, the more likely you are to be able to stick to that, and then your work side of things actually becomes more successful, because you're operating with a better mind, with a better body, and without worrying about some of these other kind of things. Otherwise, it's too easy to end up ordering takeout like every night, and having a couple of beers here, and playing some video games there, and it's just like, no, like we need to get this done. And I think that's why fitness is a really good thing for every entrepreneur to do, because whether you're going out for a run or whether you're at the gym and you're doing weights, is the biggest driver for you to do something is you. And so it's forcing yourself to run an extra mile, or to do an extra couple of reps, and that is what it's like being an entrepreneur, is because you can be putting in the work, and sometimes you don't actually see the gains, and other times you might stop going to the gym for a bit, and that's where you see some gains, and you're like, oh wow, this is great. That's it. And so it's it all ties together there. The other two things which I would say, one of them is to have it's kind of related to the fitness side as well, is to get a soundtrack. I was fortunate enough in my mind to be a kid in the 80s, so I have a pretty good soundtrack list to be able to put in from. But again, it's sometimes whether you just need that extra bit of pep, or something doesn't go right from a company side, to be able to have something which you can put the headphones on and you can pick yourself up in that side of things. So like from the 80s, a bit of Van Halen and Jump. I get up, nothing's going to get me down. White Snake is one. Here I go again on my own.
Maybe you can share your soundtrack list for running.
That's it. Yeah, that
would be very
you need to get every guest to then do a Spotify playlist. And then
how to get engaged during your run.
yeah, that's it. The only other thing I'd say, which was something that I sort of picked up late, and that was and it was just one of those things that, because of how busy you are, how busy we all are, and you really forget sometimes, like the wins and the losses and all of this. And so now I just have a private Slack channel for myself, where I'll just drop down a couple of words on anything that was significant, good or bad. And then what that does is just put in a small amount of time, at the end of every couple of weeks. And I normally line this up to run in an alternate way to like the sprints that we run at Buff. And so sprints are kind of typically like 2-week periods where you start and finish different tasks from a tech side of things. Mm-hmm. And so in between those, that's where then I'll just take some time, and even if it's just over a coffee, of then just having looked back over the last couple of weeks, and and just seeing some of the things that happened, because the nature of life in a startup is what happened a month ago can feel like a year ago. and sometimes you just forget how much progress you've made, or the great moments that there were, or even some of the the obstacles or the potholes that you've hit along the way, or different issues. And then this is a way for you to sort of like keep that front of mind, and it's a good way for you to like reflect on what you've done. And so every month I send an email to our shareholders, to our stakeholders, and then I also do a little one which is to me, based on me being a stakeholder in myself, which might sound really weird. Now I'm actually verbalizing it. It sounds very weird, but it's just a way to to spend a little bit of time and reflect on it. And I think this is something which has come out definitely from from working in tech, is that you'll work hard, you'll do the sprint, and then you'll also look at doing a retrospective, where you look back and just acknowledge, okay, what worked well, what didn't, what can we do slightly different. And when you run any kind of like production shows on, in broadcast, you're also then always bringing the team together afterwards, while it's still fresh in the mind for a debrief. What could we improve? How could we do this? And especially when you're an entrepreneur, or you're running any kind of business, you are often running and you're moving so fast that you kind of forget things. So that's one thing that I would suggest for people.
No, that's very valuable advice, not just, I think, for entrepreneurs especially, but also for everyone, in the current situation, just staying fit, staying healthy, and being mindful. And yeah, just taking some time to reflect on your achievements. And yeah, definitely super, super useful advice. Thank you, Ben. And I love the metaphor between running and, entrepreneurship, because I'm a runner myself as well. And definitely there are times when you have to really pace yourself. And I think it really applies to work-life balance as well. Awesome. That has been an absolute pleasure, Ben. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. Really, really lovely to see you again. Thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you. And for all the fans who are watching, traditional sports or esports, just look out for Sportbuff's buffs, which are going to be interactive throughout the game. Thank you very much, Ben. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.